Okay, so welcome to Cogly. So remember what we're trying to figure out again with pretty much the remainder of the class is when is it appropriate to blame? And think about the difference between, someone walking down an aisle at the store, they're trying to be careful, they trip, and as they trip, they drop their drink and say they're drinking a Starbucks, and it splashes all over your shoes. And let's even say that these are shoes that you care about. And the person, as they're trying to get up, they're obviously upset that they tripped and did that to you. You probably would say this is unfortunate. You forgive the person more than likely. I'm assuming that some of you may say, no, I still blame them. But I think it's probably pretty rare. But you would probably say, I hope the person's okay. Shoes can be cleaned or whatever. And so I hope the person's okay and I don't really blame them. So notice the difference between that and if a person was walking down the aisle, they were not being careful at all. As a matter of fact, they're bumping into a lot of people. Let's say that they have family members that are running around and playing tag or something down the aisle, and they're all laughing and joking around and sort of being rough with each other and dropping things on the floor, and then they take off running towards you and then spill their drink all over you. So you might, in that case, say, well, you know what? That is their fault. Even though they didn't intend to spill the drink on me, they should have been acting more reasonably and responsibly. They shouldn't have been acting negligent. And so, as a result of them being reckless, I had to suffer. And, maybe you blame them. And as a matter of fact, let's add to it, they're not sorry, that they all laugh and walk off, right? It's even more difficult at that point to sort of say, yeah, they're not responsible. I don't blame them. It's more difficult, right? So notice in the first one, the person's trying to be careful. They just happen to trip, they fall, they spill coffee on your shoes, and you may even be sympathetic towards them and say, hey, I hope you're okay. And, more than likely they're saying, sorry about your shoes. And so there's sort of a mutual respect there, and also they're trying to be careful, but even with them trying to be careful, it didn't work out for them. Whereas in the second case, they're, everyone's running around, they're acting really reckless and irresponsible and unreasonable. And as a result, they throw coffee on you and they think it's funny, right? And so they didn't intend to throw coffee on you, but they were not doing a lot to stop it either. And so that's more of a negligence issue. They were not acting reasonably and you had to suffer. And so in those cases, I would say it's pretty typical and it's pretty, to a high percentage that people would say, hey, you shouldn't have done that. And obviously it's not funny that you just dumped coffee on me, right? And then maybe there's this third case, right, where the person just walks up to you and dumps it over your head and just looks at you in the face, right? And it's clear they meant to. It's clear that they're looking at you, that they realize that you're not someone else, and they've dumped coffee all over your head, right? So in that case, maybe you should get security, because it would seem that the person might have lost it. Um, and let's say in that case, they never acknowledge if they're happy, sad, anything. They just look at you. So in that case, they intended to do it. They saw you. They dumped the coffee on you and continue to look at you. There's no mistaken identity. There's no good reason for it, but they definitely intended to do that. And let's say that they're not suffering from any sort of defect of thinking. They're not intoxicated. There's no misidentity. They don't have a compulsion or a mental disease that would cause them to do that. They just simply do it. And you don't know why. So in that third case, that seems to be pretty bad. It seems to be maybe even worse than the negligent case, even though the negligent case is bad. And so I couldn't see, where someone would just simply say it's okay that people dump coffee on me unless maybe you're a major pacifist. If you're just a complete pacifist and You never blame anyone for anything, no matter what happens. Some sort of stoic philosophy mixed with pacifism. I would say that's extremely rare, and almost everyone's going to blame the person who just walks up to them and pours coffee all over their head. As a matter of fact, some of you might become violent, and it may be reasonable. Some of you may think it's reasonable that the person would become violent and push the person away or something, and say, "Don't push coffee. Don't pour coffee on me." At least get distance from the person. And there could be even a greater way of expressing it, and going to fisticuffs, fighting in the aisle over this, right? And so all of those are foreseeable from someone intentionally acting to pour coffee over your head in the grocery store. But notice in every one of those cases, we have to go through sort of, what is this situation? Is it a situation where someone's acting reasonably and it was an accident? Is it a situation where someone was acting negligently and they were irresponsible, running up and down the aisle laughing? They dump coffee on you accidentally and they think it's funny. And so that's different than the first one. And then finally, the person walks up to you, just straight up pours it all over your head. So Connolly thinks that in all of these cases, and of course could be all sorts of combinations, and it could be different things like driving, but in all three of those cases, the outcome is the same. You have coffee on you that you did not want on you. You were not asking for coffee to be poured on you, and coffee was poured on you. You didn't want it, and it happened. But Connolly thinks that it's not the consequence, it's not the outcome that really matters here. What matters is how we get to that outcome. And he thinks that that's where we have to figure out if blame is appropriate. And again, I would say that it's a high likelihood that in the first case of accidentalness, and just someone tripping and they don't mean to trip, they just trip. Who doesn't trip at least once in their life, right? We all trip. And so in that case, we could kind of see, hey, it's not their fault. They didn't mean to do it. They were being careful. But even though they were being careful, they still tripped. And but in the next case, they weren't being careful. So notice, in every single way that we look at this, we're always trying to take these steps. And Connolly thinks the very first step is to appraise. And so we look if the person is acting or omitting. If an omission means not acting, right? So they're acting or not acting. And is that proper conduct? So does it go against some sort of norm? Is it insufficient concern? And there must be some sort of epistemic quality. So I tried to put that into context whenever I said someone running up and down the aisles at a grocery store playing tag, knocking things off of the shelf. So I think that there is an epistemic quality there, because what would we say about that behavior? We would say, well, it's wrong because other people may be trying to buy those items. They may be damaged now, and now the person going to buy them won't know because they're going to be put back on the shelf. And why would that be a good standard? It doesn't seem to be a good standard. It doesn't seem to be a good policy. It doesn't seem to be a good norm. So it doesn't seem good that people would be playing tag and breaking or damaging groceries that could possibly be restocked on the shelves and other people buy them. On top of that, people running around you in particular and putting you at risk. You're not playing tag. You're not in this game. They're doing it around you. So it doesn't seem to be a good practice. It doesn't seem to be a good norm. And that seems to be true. So notice we go through that sort of appraisal. And then with the person obviously just walking directly up to you, looking you right in the eyes and dumping coffee on your head seems to be a very bad norm, right? Because, some people may go to extremes and, put that person in the hospital, or vice versa. The person in the coffee, may go even further. And so that does not seem like a good norm. It does not seem good that we allow people to touch other people in offensive ways, or allow them to be touched by other items like coffee or spit or whatever it is, especially now, right? Spitting on people. Any of those sorts of things seem like really bad norms, that it would not be a good policy to say that it's okay for you to assault someone, and not self-defense, but okay for you to assault someone and to batter someone against their will. That seems like a horrible norm, and epistemically, it seems to be true. If I asked you, do you think it's okay if someone were to slap you or to slap someone you care about? I'm assuming you would say absolutely not. And some of you may even say that's going to be a fight. We're going to square and we're going to find out, right? And so it doesn't seem to be a good norm to say that it's okay for someone to harm another person who has done nothing to them other than just go shopping or something like that. So Conley says that we go through that first appraisal. Then the next step is communication. And so he says communication could be body language. It could be speech, speed of speech, the tone of the speech, how loud you speak. And it's connected usually to the action that happened. And it usually is, some sort of degree of fault and repetition of the bad action. So, for example, if someone is walking down the aisle and they accidentally trip and fall and spill it on you, spill the coffee on your feet, you're probably going to jump back. And, they're probably like, oh, sorry. And more than likely, you seeing that it was an accident, you may be like, oh, are you okay? Did you hurt anything? And so more than likely, the type of speech is going to be more like, oh, wow, this is unfortunate. And, I hope everyone's okay. I hope my shoes are okay. And so it's a tone and usually communication that's reconciliation. And so let's reconcile this. The person who spilled the coffee on you may even say, I'll pay, for your shoes to be cleaned. And so they may go even further to say, I want to rectify this action. But usually in accidents where the person didn't mean to do it, the communication is reconciliation. Let me try to help to reverse this, to put you back in the state that you were before this occurred. Now, a lot of us, especially let's say we just bought those shoes and let's say it was the last pair of shoes like those and we've been waiting a really long time to get them. And our first outing at the store, we have coffee dumped on them. So we may reasonably be upset in the beginning, but seeing the other person say they're sorry, that they want to make up for it, they want to clean them, notice the communication is going to matter. So where they're saying, I want to make up for this, I want to do something about it, it's easy to say, okay, let's work this out, right? Even if you could, you're really sad about your shoes having coffee on them, even if that is the case, you kind of say, well, this was just unfortunate. And I'm sad my shoes are like this, but, I don't dislike this person or anything. And, I don't really blame them, for example. But now, with the people playing tag down the aisle, a lot of times we're going to look at them while they're playing tag and give them the look like, what are you thinking? Of course you shouldn't be acting like this. And so we're going to give them a mean mug, right? We're going to mean mug them to kind of, stop doing what you're doing. So our body language, without saying anything to them, will communicate. On top of that, we may actually say something to them, right? We may be like, hey, slow down. What are you doing? There are kids in the aisle. You don't need to be running like that. Or we may not want to make eye contact with them at all. We may think that they're acting so rambunctious that we don't even want to look at them. But notice, avoiding even acknowledging they exist is another way of communicating. So Conley's going to say that, this is typical. First we assess the situation and then we give sort of body language. And in this case, there's speech that can happen before the event. And then, of course, when the event happens, they spill the coffee on you and they laugh. Now, notice they're communicating with you now, definitely. And they communicated with you before because whenever, in this hypothetical, you're giving them the look like stop, or you're not looking at them like you don't exist. Or you've actually said to them, hey, y'all need to settle down. In all those cases, they've communicated back to you too, even if they didn't say anything, by not doing it. That's saying, I don't care what you say, right? That's a form of communication. So Conley says that this is going to occur. Then the coffee is spilled on you. They laugh, which is definitely communication. They do not care. And then, of course, whatever you do after that, right? So you could call a manager. You could go ahead and square up with the whole crew. Whatever it is you're going to do, you're going to communicate through your body language, through your speech, something back to them. And then, of course, where the person just directly walks up to you, they look you right in the eyes, that's communication. They're letting you know, I know it's you, right? They're communicating with you. I know it's you, and you're the one getting the coffee over the head. And then, of course, you're probably going to communicate back with them, what, maybe some cuss words is wrong with you. What are you thinking? Or maybe worse, right? It could be a fight. So all of that he thinks is typical. And notice what he's trying to capture is in every single case, whether it's driving down the road, whether it's someone in the, store, if it's someone at your house, doing something funky, I don't know, smoking a cigarette in your house and you don't want that, you're going to communicate. Whatever it is, Cogley says in every single case, we go through these steps. We appraise the situation. We look for epistemic qualities and norms. Are they acting within norms? We communicate through our body language, whether or not we like this or don't like this, and they communicate back with us. And then finally, the sanction. And so the sanction is what we are saying, look, you deserve to be punished, right? So either by me not liking you or by me calling a manager or calling the police, whatever it is, it's me saying you've gone too far, like something has happened now, or, just me communicating directly, don't do this. So then the sanction is really saying that this is unfair and it's going to be based on the seriousness of harm. For example, if it's a venti Americana that's not iced but hot and it just was ordered and it's just spilled on you, and now not only are your shoes stained with coffee, but in addition to that, your feet are on fire, right? So that's a little more serious as opposed to an iced Americana, right? An iced Americana, not going to burn you, right? And the same thing over the head, right? So if they're pouring it over your head and it's extremely hot, then that's more serious than an iced one. Not only that, reputation. So I don't know, every time you go to the store, the same person walks up to you and dumps coffee over your head. If the first time I'm thinking it's going to be bad, second time, way worse. And then the people playing up and down the aisle. If every time you go to the supermarket, you see the same people playing tag up and down the aisles, you're finally going to be like, hey, look, that's it, right? No more. Something's got to be done about this. And then no hypocrisy. And so are you doing the same thing? So if you were playing tag down aisle 5 and now you walk into aisle 6 and other people are playing tag, would you really have a right to sanction if you were doing the exact same thing? And so hypocrisy is going to come into it. Are you being biased against someone else? And then also, typically, who do we blame for children acting bad in a store? Well, it's usually the parents. We usually don't say, oh, hey, little child, come here. You're supposed to know how to act at 5 years old or 6 or 7. You're supposed to have life all figured out. You're not supposed to act like this, and you should know better, right? We typically don't do that with the child. We typically look over at the parent like, hey, you should be telling your child not to do this. This is obviously bad, right? Whatever it is. And so, I don't know, let's say that the child's opening the cereal boxes and eating it, right? And they're 5 years old. Maybe we could expect that from a 5-year-old, but where the parent's sitting there and laughing about it and the child's, I don't know, dropping the boxes of cereal on the ground and then moving on to the next one after a couple of bites and the parent's just laughing, we would probably say, hey, parent, you obviously should know better than this. The child doesn't, of course, but you should. You should know better. Yeah. And so Conley says that we go through all of these steps, and that once we go through those steps in this communication, we come to a determination of not only blame, but how much blame the person deserves. If it's an accident, maybe no blame. If it's negligent, probably some blame. If it's intentional, the person's doing it intentionally, then the level increases. It's even more serious, right? And if they've done it over and over and over, they've done the same action over and over, and they're not changing the way that they act, and you're constantly being harmed, then we may think, hey, this has become more serious because you're not stopping. It is repeating, right? And every time I come into this store, it happens the same way. I leave smelling like coffee, right? And even with the person tripping that did not mean to trip, if it happened twice in the same store with the same person tripping, the first time you might say, that is an accident. The second time you might say, hey, hold on. How could this exact same person have the exact same accident and I'm the one that suffers, right? So even then in the accident, we may say, hey, this shouldn't be happening over and over. And so Connolly says that we go through these steps and it's pretty complex, right? Because People sometimes are acting willfully and intentionally, and other times people are just acting irresponsible and unreasonable. And then sometimes people just have accidents. They just accidentally do something that leads to a bad consequence. And so he says that we have to go through this. And not only that, we have to also view our own actions and what we did in the situation. So if we knew that, I don't know, these kids are playing tag, right? Or these, young adults are playing tag in the store, we don't like it, and we stuck our foot out and tripped one of them, which caused the coffee to end up on us, right? Then we had a part to play in it, right? We shouldn't probably have stuck our foot out and tripped them. There may have been other ways of handling it. But he thinks that no matter what the situation, that we go through these steps. So notice Cogley's going to say that blame is a real thing. It's not something made up. It's not some fiction. It's not like the phenomenological argument where determinism may be true. Cogley says, it doesn't even matter if it's true or not. This is how we live. So notice he's trying to describe what is the case. Okay. So let me go back, actually. So I had a real case, and I wanted to tell you. So I think it was 2 days ago. There were teenagers flying up and down my street on a four-wheeler. And they were going really fast, over 50 miles per hour, maybe 60. And there were very young kids playing on the sidewalks, riding their bikes, skating, skateboards, etc. And some of the kids would occasionally, because they were very young, 5, 6 years old, they would accidentally trip or something and then go into the edge of the street. And so these teenagers were riding a four-wheeler up and down the street really fast. And it would have killed one of the small children had they hit them. So my neighbor, went out to the street when they came by and did his hands like slow down, and they slowed down and they said, "What are you saying?" And he said, "Hey, there are kids out here. Just, it's fine if you're riding it, but it's actually illegal. But no one really cared as long as they weren't being dangerous." And he said, "Slow it down." And they said, "Okay." So then they left, and when they came back, they were going even faster the other direction. Now my neighbor had gone inside. So I pointed over at one of the little kids and I said, "Hey, there are kids out here. You need to slow down." And the guy driving, he had completely ignored me, didn't care. And the guy on the back mean mugged me. Now, he's a teenager. He's not an adult. But I thought, yeah, I wished you would come up to my face like that, right? Come mean mug me to my face like that. You're putting these kids at risk, these younger kids at risk, and you're driving. And not only that, not only was it dangerous for the younger kids, it was dangerous for those teenagers because they were flying up and down the road, and had a truck or a car pulled out in front of them, it would have killed them. The kids on the four-wheeler would have died. And so it was a dangerous situation for everyone. But notice, and my reaction to them was like, "Hey, we've asked you once to slow down, and everyone out here is being understanding. Like, no one really cares that you're riding the four-wheeler. No one's trying to stop you from having fun, but you're really risking your own lives and the lives of these young children." And so it was a dangerous situation. And so, but Cogley ended up being right about me because of the repetition. So they were asked once, "Hey, slow down," and in a nice way, no one was nasty to them. And they said, "Okay, we'll slow down." But then they didn't. And they flew by. And notice the communication. One ignored me, the other one mean mugged me. So then my sanction increased. So instead of just asking them to stop, it was, I need to find where they live and I need to go talk to their parents, right? I need to tell their parents, hey, they are putting their own lives at risk and also these other kids. Now, I didn't do that because I had to run an errand, but that's what I wanted to do. And had I been able, I didn't have time that day, but had I had the time to go find out where they lived, I would have talked to the parents and just say, "Hey, look, this is an unsafe situation. You probably don't even know, right? Because you want your kids outside having fun, but, this is dangerous." Yeah, so I think Cogley does capture something that seems to be true. If every day you drive down your neighborhood, someone pulls out in front of you, the first time you may be like, oh, yeah, oh, oops, but then they pull out in front of you every day, you're like, hey, what's wrong with them, right? And so there does seem to be something true about what Cogley is giving us. Okay, so blaming some motion suggests that we think people are morally blameworthy based upon the wrongs that they have committed or try to make sure that the response is fitting. And so notice we have reactive attitudes and it's linked to desert. So had I jumped out in front of the four-wheeler with a baseball bat and started beating the four-wheeler and then trying to get to the kids, most people would say, I think, it is bad that these kids were speeding, but to beat their four-wheeler with a baseball bat and then go after the teenagers with a baseball bat is too much, right? That does not fit what happened, right? And there may be people that want to do it, right? But wanting to do it is not the same thing as actually doing it. And so Connolly thinks that our response must fit the damage done. So whatever was done, it must fit. So speeding down the road, it seems to me that calling a constable to stop them from speeding or talking to the parents is even better, right? Because I don't want the kids getting a ticket. But at the same time, what we're wanting is for the action not to happen again and for no one to get hurt, especially, people we care about or ourselves. We tend to defend, people that are in our family or our friends because we have an emotional attachment to them, which is connected to reactive attitudes. And so notice it does seem that Cogley is connecting something that's really the case. And again, taking the coffee examples, if this person trips and dumps coffee on your shoes, and you take your shoes off and start beating them with the shoes that they were saying, sorry, I didn't mean to. Most people would say you're the one in the wrong, not the person that accidentally tripped, right? For the people running up and down the aisle and they trip and dump the coffee on you, what's fitting there, right? And they laugh in your face. What is fitting there? Not what you want to do. Because a lot of people would want to fight, right? If they're laughing in your face after dumping coffee on you because they were being irresponsible and reckless, you might want to punch someone, right? That might be the reactive attitude that's internal. But what should actually happen? And I think that most would say get a hold of a manager, let the manager know what's going on, and either the manager asks them to leave the store and not to come back, or, they simply are told you cannot run up and down this aisle. And then maybe the manager, I don't know, covers your laundry, for having the coffee cleaned, or the people are forced to do that. So usually it's not, let's beat up their whole crew, right? Even though if that's your desire, it doesn't seem to fit. So Conley also thinks that there are proper responses. Now, for the person who walks up to you, identifies you by looking directly at your face, and then dumps the coffee all over you and continues to look at you, and let's say it's even a mean mug, right? Then at that point, I think that it would be self-defense, right? Because it is an assault, it is a battery. It would be self-defense to push the person away from you, to make sure that they're not going to do further, damage or hurt you some way, right? And so that does seem fitting to defend yourself, to get the person away from you. Under the law, under the common law, it's only legal to do what they did to you back. So one hit is one hit. Once the other person becomes the aggressor, then under the law, then you're no longer practicing self-defense. So if someone slaps you and you beat them and put them into the hospital, you became the aggressor at some point. Probably punch two under the law. Yeah, your second punch since they punched you once or slapped you once. So notice in this case, pushing them away from you would be legal. Definitely calling the police would be okay, and saying, hey, this person, something seems weird. They just walked up to me, dumped coffee on me. They didn't do anything after that, but just stare at me. Something weird is going on, right? And so that might be security in the store, and so all of those things, right? But taking out a sword and cutting off their hand or something, this is the hand that offended me, and, slashing their hand off. That, to most people, and definitely under law, would be considered going too far, right? Your sanction was beyond. It was not linked to the proper reactive attitude. And again, I'm not saying what you might think about. I'm not saying what you might internally want to do, but what you actually do, right? So Cognity's not saying that we might not have those thoughts, because we might have those thoughts. It's what we actually do, what's linked to it. Okay, so that is Cogley in a nutshell. He goes through the different levels and different steps of our blaming emotions, and then finally how our reactive attitudes are linked to the proper response. So let me tell you about an experiment that I run in class. Whenever I run this in my face-to-face class, what I do is I tell my students that I'm really upset with them and someone's cheated on the midterm and I've caught them. And I'm mad at the entire class because it looks like others involved, some knew about it and they didn't tell me. And leading up to the midterm, I call on a person that doesn't really exist in the class for right around 3 weeks. And as I call on them, and of course, this is a building up. It takes about a month to have this exercise happen in the class. So for 3 weeks, I'm calling on them. And the first week that I call, I'm concerned. So I act concerned. Does anyone know where Sally is? Does anyone know Sally? And I'll even have students go, oh, I remember Sally from the first day, but she doesn't exist. I'm just making her up. And so I go, yeah, I don't know what happened to Sally, but if any of you see her on campus, could you please let her know, to talk to me? The midterm's coming up. Then the next week, I'm like, hey, did anyone get in touch with Sally? This is kind of concerning me. Then the third week, I'm like, you know what? It's ridiculous. Sally's not contacting me, not responding to me. I even called her cell phone number that's listed in, at Lone Star, and Sally's not talking to me. I'm really not happy with Sally. If anyone sees Sally, tell Sally to drop the class now. So then we have the midterm, and then of course there's a couple of assignments. And then on this day, I have in my announcements where I say, I'm really upset with the class. Someone cheated on the midterm. I'm in a bad mood. Don't ask me any questions. Don't talk to me. Don't lie. And if any of you know me, even through the videos, you should kind of know I have a sense of humor. I like to joke around. I'm definitely not the kind of person to act mean, towards students. But on this day, I act mean. So I act like I'm mad. I act like I don't want to talk to them. I tell them to go sit down. I tell them to leave me alone. I say, everyone better have their cell phone up today or I'm going to throw you out. So then I have another student from another class that needs extra credit, usually an introduction to philosophy class, come in and pretend to be Sally or Bob or Fred or whoever it is that I've been calling. And I leave the room before I motion for them to come in. And this is before class starts, a couple of minutes. And they go in and sit down. And of course, other people in the class notice, hey, there's someone for the first time in the class, and Professor Watts is freaking out and acting crazy. He has an attitude today. And so they ask that person, hey, who are you? And then they say, oh, I'm Sally. And then everyone's like, oh, damn, you need to leave. Like, he's in a bad mood. And before the midterm, he was acting upset with you that you weren't responding or anything. And this isn't the day for you to be here. So then what I do, I work with this student. It's not real. It's not a real student. I work with this student and I tell them, bring a backpack or I'll provide one that's empty. Don't put anything in it or put like clothes or something in it that you don't care about. And what I do is I come in and I go, who are you? And they'll say, oh, well, I'm Sally. And I kind of slam the door when I walk in before all this. And I go, what? And then I go off dropping the F-bombs. I'm like, how dare you come to this class? Look at all these students in here. All of them have been working really hard all semester. And your very presence and being here is disrespectful to them. F you. Get the F out of here. And I grab their bag and throw it across the classroom. And I look at everyone in the classroom and I go, get out to Sally. And then they're like, oh, wow. And like I always tell them to kind of feebly, like they're defeated, go over and grab their bag and walk out. And all of my students, even, the ones that, hang out with me and talk about philosophy, all of my students are looking at me like, that's messed up, right? All of them. And then I tell them, hey, look, everyone, this is my introduction to philosophy student. Their real name is, Amy. And so everyone give Amy a hand. And everyone's like, oh, what the hell just happened? And they're clapping for Amy. And then I get these reactions. Wow, we thought you had lost your mind, right? We thought you had gone crazy. And then I polled the class. Well, how many of you thought what Amy did was wrong? Like Sally, really Amy. How many of you thought what? Well, no, I'll say Amy because that's the real name I get. How many of you thought what Amy did was wrong? And the class were like, they'll hold their hand up like, Amy should have been coming to class. And then I'm like, okay, so how many of you think what I did was reasonable? Like my reaction of dropping F-bombs, screaming at the student, grabbing their backpack, throwing it across the room. How many of you think that that's okay? And I could tell you, in all the time I've been teaching and in all the times that I've ran this experiment, I've only had one student, and I couldn't believe it, but they said, yeah, that was fine. And I was like, what are you talking about? Of course it's not fine. It's not okay for a professor to drop F-bombs towards a student and to literally cuss at them and then grab their things and throw it across the room. It could never be okay, right? No, unless it's like a violent situation where you're having to defend another student, other than that, that is never okay. But across the board, students are like, no, in this situation, we would have considered that way out of line. Your sanction was way, way beyond anything it should have been. So it's really interesting because when I run this experiment, Conley turns out to be true. Everything that Conley says, all the steps that we go through, they go through. And they turn from this fictitious Sally who, didn't come to class and all of this, that Sally's wrong, to I'm wrong. And so they think Sally was wrong in the beginning, but in the end, my reaction was wrong. And so Conley ends up being right all the way through. The students sanctioned Sally in the beginning and sanctioned me at the end because the reactive attitude was not properly linked. So that is Conley. And he does seem to be capturing what we do. Yeah. All right. So if you have any questions over Conley, let me know. I'm going to have extra credit assignments posted on this. I think he's capturing something that is what we do. Yeah. All right. So if you're on Telegram, ask me on Telegram. If not, send me an email.